motion is this House believes we should recognize the right to be free from intentionally offensive speech. So, just a reminder, between first and third minute, the POIs are allowed. After that, not anymore. 4-minute speeches, if you go short, no worries. So yeah, that's it. Unless there are any questions, I call on the first club speaker to open the case.
Thank you for the floor. So, this House believes we should recognize our right to be free from intentionally offensive speech. First, we have some definition. Intentionally offensive speech is intended and it's made to hurt someone. These are some stereotypes, gossips, and insult. And what does this do? It hurts people, and it hurts them emotionally and socially, or prevents constructive conversation. And we should also know something about penalties. Since this motion talks about recognizing rights, we would penalize those that break it. So our first argument is the quality of deliberation. Offensive speech silences some groups such as minorities. It is important to know that you can have quality of deliberation if you allow offensive speech. And why is this? If you have offensive speech, this is not gonna make you react irrationally. Instead, this is gonna make you react emotionally. This means that it prevents irrational conversations. For certain groups, the most important people that we talk about are minorities. It is justified for us to ban offensive speech because this makes justice for everybody and people can express their feelings and thinking. According to Mill, free speech is very important for individuality, so you need it to be able to talk about individual experience, to engage and to evaluate them. For example, if you have a black person and they are called an N-word, they probably won't react rationally, but rather emotionally, and we need to prevent that. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you for your speech. And we call on the first opposition speaker to open the case for offside.
So I'm the first opposition speaker, and I first will put our own frame of the debate, negate the first speech of the proposition, and put our own argument, which is subjectivity. So first, we want to, on the side of opposition, we want to realize why exactly people actually use offensive speech. We believe that this is mainly used to critique others, and the side of proposition mentioned like gossip and stereotypes, and these have negative consequences. But on the side of opposition, we want to acknowledge that those are not the only options and the only examples of intentionally offensive speech. Because protests, for instance, could also be considered intentionally offensive speech against the government. We use offensive speech to critique others' actions, and it's a natural byproduct of just being and having opinions. So it's unjust to prevent us from expressing our opinion. This was already part of the negation of the first talk, but also we want to say that the quality of So the first argument of the proposition was quality of deliberation, and they spoke about how an emotional reaction is brought about by offensive speech. But this emotional reaction exactly is offensive speech that they talk about. So minorities also use this offensive speech against those who offend them. So should the minorities that are offended also be penalized for this speech, or just the majority that are offensive against the minority? No, thank you. somewhat hurt by intentionally offensive speech, we still believe it's worth it overall, which my second speaker will expand on. So my argument is the argument of subjectivity. So the fact that they want legal penalties for intentionally offensive speech. But the question is, how would we objectively decide what is intentionally offensive speech? So how could a court decide objectively that someone intended to offend someone if, as we said on the side of opposition, this is simply a natural reaction that is elicited in life and is perfectly acceptable? So we believe that courts cannot objectively determine whether offensive speech can be intentional or is intentional. And if the court decided that they could, that they can determine when it is intentional, quickly everything could become offensive, or everything that goes against the majority rule will become offensive. And we believe that this would overall hurt the quality of deliberation and in general society, because some opinions would be stifled entirely, because they would be labeled as offensive. So this also restricts our freedom to express ourselves.
Thank you. And we call on the second proposition speaker period.
Okay. So first of all, you said that it's natural to have to have opinion and to say what you disagree with. I agree with this part, but it's natural to have opinions, but why should you be then offensive? You can express your feelings in a nicer way, not exactly to be offensive, because offensive speeches are usually mainly not used to critique, but to offend someone, to evoke an emotional response, and because of that, some people don't really tell an opinion, and you don't really get the truth, which we'll come to that later. So yeah, our next argument is that offensive speeches cause more harm than benefit. So first of all, we have two harms that offensive speech causes. First of all, it's individual harm. When people get offended and then they don't engage in the conversation as they should, which will bring us to social harm later. And the second part of individual harm is because of stereotypes and gossip, which are parts of offensive speech. People even get less opportunities in life because of unreal expectations that are often way too high that they can't achieve, or even that expectations are wrong, and so people believe wrong things, and then they are not equally treated and don't get equal opportunities. For example, if we have a blonde girl, then the stereotype says that they are less smart, they're dumb, and sometimes people don't listen to them because of that. People, they don't necessarily get the same opportunities to get a job, to get a speech, and that's why we don't necessarily get the truth and they're offended. And that leads us to social harm, because in a utilitarian sense, Mill said that we can get the truth if we listen to all sides. If we listen to all the conversation, all the opinions, and after the debate we can say this is true, this is not true, this is the truth, and this is the best for all. So if some people don't say their opinion, then we can't really get the whole truth, because they're suppressed and they don't say what they think, and perhaps they are right. We won't know, because they won't say what is right, what do they believe, and then we won't get the whole opinion and the majority's truth. So in the end, Mill's utilitarianistic position says that what is right is if it will bring the most benefit to all, and because this offensive speech causes more harm than benefit, therefore offensive speech should be abandoned.
Great, thank you. Thank you for this speech. And we call on the second up speaker.
opposition speaker, and first I will present to negate your argument, and then I will present our own argument, which is utility. So you claim that that offensive speech is used for individual and social harm, and then you mentioned an oppressed girl which was oppressed by offending her through stereotypes. We believe that this is exactly the reason why harmful speech should not be oppressed and should not be restricted, because we believe this is a way of expressing our anger, and we believe that it is necessary for people to have a way of expressing their opinions, even though, especially in minorities, even though it might sound offensive. So our argument is that is the argument of utility. So we believe that we do not do general good when we limit offensive speech. So we disagree with your argument that we do more harm than good. So as we live in democracies, we know that minorities are the vulnerable ones, because always the majority is the one that can express their opinion, while minorities are silenced. This is why minorities have less social power and are not able to make decisions. Therefore, we believe that minorities are more likely to have a desire to express their anger, and as we believe that their views are often also not heard because of the majority. At the end, the majority would also be the one deciding what is considered offensive speech. Therefore, minorities would not be able to say when harmful speech can come in action. So as we restrict harmful speech, we, like I said, silence the minorities and don't do any good to them, so we do not help them, but do more harm than good. As an example, we can take any government policy that is obviously made by the majority, so we do not consider minorities in this case, which is when the majority would try to oppress minorities and express their opinions instead of, so at the same time silencing them. We also see that here in any government policies, for example, minorities cannot express their opinions, but they want to express their anger, and offensive speech exactly is the way to express your anger. So it is necessary to critique the majority and try to say your opinion without, if necessary, being offensive. So, like I said, we believe the silencing the minorities would do more harm than good, because they would not be able to say what is their individual opinions.
Right, thank you. And for the last speech of the debate, Nika Banarjadeh.
So, dear panel, individuality is of crucial importance, and being able to express your thoughts, being able to express things you think about, being able to express yourself is of utmost importance, and this principle is mostly justified on the side of opposition and not on opposition. So, my refutation will be integrated into my second clash, which will be utilitarianism and pragmatic consequences. So, my first clash is principle. Where do you get better deliberation, and where do you essentially provide people that they can express themselves the way they want to? So what we told you is that at the point of which you have offensive speech, you're going to be silencing certain things, certain people, because simply they will not be able to express themselves rationally, because they will have an emotional response to this. But from the side of opposition, we never directly got refutation from this. They only mitigated it with saying, oh yes, but this cannot be generalized, and for that reason we should not be upholding this principle. So we would like you to notice that this still stands. It's hard for you to express yourself normally where you're essentially called an insult or something like that, because then you're not thinking rationally anymore, and you're not not the way you're actually supposed to be. You have a response of anger, and we want to prevent that. But furthermore, we would also like to address the point about generalizability. According to Mill, you have essential interests such as security, and he also says deliberation is one of the crucial values. So for that reason, we think that there actually is some generalization to be made in offensive speech. Firstly, its intent is not to critique, but to offend. Even if we admit that there may be some critique in this, which will be further addressed in my second clash, you still have the intent of it is offense. And furthermore, you also have things such as Feinberg skills and things like that, with which you actually can generalize some offensive speech. Most often you can just generalize its intent. Okay, so for that reason, it is extremely important because, as our first speaker already told you, at the point at which you have normal conversation, at the point at which you have free deliberation of good quality, you can express yourself, which also essentially enables you to realize yourself as an individual, to have those individualistic experiences, and with that we suffice the principle of not only our first argument, but also the principle of harm. And our second clash is utilitarianism. So the question here is, where can minorities express themselves the most? First point that I would like to point out here is that even if we admit that they're the ones that are oppressed the most and have the most anger, we have to notice that the consequence of them being offensive back is not going to bring them to a better position in life. Instead, what's going to make is just make an exchange between the majority and minority, and they're going to be exchanging like offensive statements, offensive things about them, not actually making constructive claims, not making constructive conversation. And even if minorities do have the rights to be the most angry and to make the most offensive speech, this will not bring them to a better place. So for that reason, this argument on side of opposition is essentially mitigated because it does not stand pragmatically. But furthermore, you also have to note this our argument where we told you that you cannot participate in conversation of the majority if you are offended. It would be more likely for you to just simply step out of it because you feel pressured, because they have unreal expectations and perception of you. So for that reason, we also fight this clash better, so both sides opposition.
Right, thank you, Nika. Okay, so I think this was a good debate. I like that the structures were clear. I think you guys followed what was going on in that term. So I think that that's something that's really nice, considering that most of you did the debate for the first time. Okay, so I think that just my critique will be more focused on content-wise, because I think that you use lots of good things, but I think that in some ways you want to be maybe a bit clearer what you're doing with your arguments in terms of how we are linking things back to with philosophy, right? I think on proposition, you have good use of your Mill's reasoning that we talked about yesterday, and I think you have a very clear structure in second prop especially. I think it was easy to follow it through. I think that what we want to maybe be a bit more careful about is actually one thing. I think that, when you talk about utility with Mill, just from the viewpoint of philosophy, focus on the others and the utility. So you guys talk a lot about how it's important to have more benefits than harms. I think for Mill it's about the minimization of harm rather, right? So we are trying to focus to show that you're causing the least harm possible on your side rather than showing the most benefits. Because Mill doesn't say that, right? He's careful about saying that, regardless of what the positive impacts of our actions are, at the end of the day, we want to focus on the negatives and minimizing harm, and that's the only justification, right? So I think this is one thing that I think here, and I think secondly, I think you are good at responding, the whole bench, to the opposition's challenges. I think that one link that kind of missed from your side was explaining why minorities benefit from, a better deliberation. So you tell me why deliberation is better. You also do tell me why at the end of the day you are protecting minorities. But I think that this was clear in your speech, Nika. You could have just said, utility is better for minorities at the point when we have better deliberation because everyone benefits from it, right? Because probably all people are not racist, right? So when we talk about actual ideas, when they get a fair hearing, when we don't have this element of offensive speech, probably more people are going to buy into minorities' arguments as well. So I think that this would be one way that you could just shift your arguments. I think it will make good use of what we talked yesterday though. So, this is something that I like. On opposition, I also think that the similar thing happened. I think that, for me, I just think that you guys could have tried to link your case a bit more together, because lots of your points work well if you combine them, even better than they do individually, and that, could have been exploited on your side. So for example, I think that in second op, your argument, right, so your argument about utility could have been linked with what Eva was talking about earlier. So if everything is subjective, who is going to be hurt the most in this, under this motion? I mean, if everything's subjective and we don't have clear metrics about, what constitutes offensive speech, probably people who are most disenfranchised in status quo are also going to bear the most consequences. Right? So, judges are more likely to find offensive speech when there will be a black guy in front of them than whether there is going to be a white guy. Right? So things like that, how our stereotypes play into subjectivity and why we cannot, see into other people's head and what they intended to do, could even strengthen your point about minorities and utility, and then, this would just make your argument stronger. I don't think there was any issue with your argument, and I think it was also had a very clear structure, and I like the illustration, but, overall, it could have been made stronger by just linking it back with this point. And I think that, so, I think that overall the debate was good for a first-time effort. I think that what you want to be more careful about is, just thinking that you are explaining every step down the line. And, because debate is not only about philosophy. So I think maybe a bit abstract, right? So try to explain things in a more tangible way as well. For example, a very easy way that I think for opposition, explaining why this is always subjective, just saying that, we can't see in other people's head, we never know what's going on with them, whether they intended to offend someone, or whether it was a burst of anger. Because prop needs to prove to you that there is a difference between the two, because they are only, limiting intentional offensive speech. So this is something that, just try to explain to me more why certain things can happen. Just ask yourself, why is the previous claim I made true? Why is it that I believe in it, right? So I think that this is also true in proposition. So for example, when you're explaining to me, why is the quality of the liberation decreases, or when you're explaining to me why is it that, we have more harms than benefits, just try to show to me, more why your impacts actually happen, right? So why is it, for example, that we get individual harm? Why is it, and in what ways are stereotypes harmful, right? So, generally this is just something that we would call more analysis. It's a bit annoying, but so just try to explain more, be more critical of how you're thinking and why the previous premises are true. Because on the other side of the table, people might not believe the same things as you do, right? So you try to justify as much as you can. And the same is true, I would argue, for philosophy essays, right? So you want to pay attention to what you're saying because the philosopher who's reading you, I don't know, I wrote Marxist essays, and the other person who is examining you might not be a Marxist, and vice versa. You might be a libertarian and write a libertarian essay, and the person on the other side is a Marxist one. So you need to put in extra effort to make sure that everything is substantiated and well explained, so that even if you see its reasoning as clear and convincing. And that's it. I think this was a really nice good effort, and thank you all for the time, right? For today's. Thanks.
Thank you.